They said the town was quiet. But quiet didn't mean peaceful. It meant obedient. For decades, nothing important happened there without approval. Not from the courthouse, not from elections, not from the law, from the shadows. By the early 1900s, towns like this one didn't need burning crosses anymore. Influence had matured. It wore suits. It sat on juries. It signed permits. And in this town, nearly every decision passed through men who shared the same unspoken loyalty. So when the county announced a new sheriff, nobody expected resistance. They expected replacement. What they didn't expect was a black man stepping out of the train wearing a pressed coat, carrying no luggage, and looking around like he already knew the place. By the time word reached the square, shops slowed their business. Windows closed. People watched from behind curtains. Not because they hated him, because they were afraid for him. The KKK didn't react publicly. That was the first warning sign. They let him walk into the office. Let him pin the badge to his chest. Let him shake hands with the mayor. Silence was never absence. It was assessment. The sheriff understood that immediately, because before he ever wore a badge, he had learned something most men didn't learn until it was too late. When powerful people ignore you, they're deciding how to remove you. His first week passed without incident. No threats, no letters, no vandalism, just smiles that didn't reach eyes. Then came the tests. A black farmhand arrested for disturbing the peace. A white deputy filing paperwork incorrectly, deliberately. A courthouse clerk misplacing reports. Small things, but patterns reveal ownership. The sheriff didn't confront anyone. He corrected paperwork, reassigned patrols, sat quietly during meetings. He listened, and while the town assumed he was adjusting, he was mapping. Late at night, alone in the office, he opened a leather folder he'd carried with him since before the election. Inside were names, old cases, depositions that never made it to court. His secret past wasn't violence. It was memory. Years earlier, under another county, under another judge, he had watched the KKK dismantle a black community legally, through taxes, arrests, zoning laws, and silence. He had survived by learning their language. Now he spoke it fluently. By the end of the second week, a message finally arrived. No signature, no threat. Just a sentence slipped under the office door. You're respected here as long as you remember your place. He smiled when he read it, because that sentence told him everything. They believed he was temporary. They believed the badge would break him. They believed fear still worked the way it used to. What they didn't know was that the sheriff had already identified 3 men in town whose power depended on secrecy, not force. And once secrecy is threatened, control panics. The real confrontation hadn't started yet, but the town could feel it. Something had shifted, and everyone was waiting to see who would move first. They moved faster than he expected. By the 3rd week, the town changed its tone. The smiles disappeared. So did the paperwork errors. Instead, everything became correct. Too correct. Deputies followed procedure perfectly. Clerks filed reports on time. Judges quoted statutes word for word. That's when the sheriff knew the next phase had begun. Because when people who rely on chaos suddenly become disciplined, it means someone higher up is watching. The first real signal came from the bank. A loan renewal for a black-owned grocery was suddenly denied, not rejected, just under review. The owner had never missed a payment. The sheriff asked why. The answer was polite, legal, unchallengeable. That night, 2 church elders visited him quietly. They didn't ask for protection. They asked if he planned to stay, because staying meant consequences. The sheriff listened without interrupting. Then he told them something he hadn't told anyone in town yet. He wasn't here to fight the KKK. He was here to make them visible. The elders didn't understand. Neither did the town yet. The following week, the sheriff reopened an old land dispute case from 15 years earlier. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it rattled people who hadn't expected history to be questioned. Survey records were requested. Witness names resurfaced. Property lines suddenly didn't align the way they were supposed to. One of the men named in those records happened to sit on the town council. Another owned the feed store. A third funded the sheriff's opponent in the last election. Still, no threats came. Instead, rumors spread that the sheriff was unstable, that he had a radical agenda, that he was being used by outsiders. Reputations were the weapon now. And then, finally, someone blinked. A deputy, white, young, nervous, requested a private meeting. He closed the door behind him and spoke in a whisper. "They're asking questions about you," he said. "Not officially, just background questions." The sheriff nodded. "About what?" "Your past. Who you worked for before. Why you left." That was the moment the sheriff had been waiting for. Because the KKK had made a mistake. They assumed his past was a weakness. They didn't know it was the foundation. The next day, the sheriff did something that shocked the town. He called a public meeting. Not about crime, not about race, about records. He announced a full audit of arrests, fines, land seizures, and jury selections over the last 20 years. Nothing accusatory, just transparent. Men shifted in their seats, because transparency is dangerous to people who survive on silence. That night, the barn outside town filled again. No robes, no torches, just anger. They didn't plan violence. They planned exposure. The sheriff's name would be dragged, his credibility questioned, his allies isolated. But what they didn't know was that his secret past included one more thing. He had already sent copies of those records out of town, to newspapers, to state offices, to people who didn't belong to this county. So if anything happened to him, the town wouldn't stay quiet. And for the first time in decades, the KKK realized something terrifying. They didn't own the timeline anymore. They were reacting. And when control reacts instead of commands, it starts to crumble. The real confrontation was coming. Not with fists, not with guns, but with names, dates, and proof. By morning, the courthouse steps were full. Not protesters. Observers. People who had never shown up for anything before suddenly wanted to be seen seeing. The sheriff stood at the top, calm, hands folded behind his back. Inside, the first audit boxes were opened. Files that hadn't been touched in years released a smell of dust and old ink, the scent of decisions made without witnesses. The pattern appeared fast. Traffic stops that only happened on certain roads. Fines that doubled for certain names. Jury pools that somehow never looked like the town itself. No single document proved intent. Together, they told a story no one could deny. By noon, word reached the feed store. Then the council office. Then the private back rooms where influence usually stayed invisible. Phones started ringing, not threats, warnings. A state inspector might be sent. Funding could be delayed. The sheriff's budget needed review. Pressure without fingerprints. That afternoon, a cross appeared. Not burning, painted. On the side of the old water tower. It was meant to remind people who still claimed the town. The sheriff didn't send deputies to erase it. He sent a photographer. By evening, the image was already outside the county. That's when the letters arrived. Anonymous. Typed, carefully worded. They didn't mention race. They mentioned order. They suggested the sheriff was disturbing a balance that worked. He read them all, then placed them in a single folder, labeled Intimidation, Nonviolent. The next escalation was smarter. A lawsuit, filed by a citizens' association nobody had heard of before. They accused the sheriff of selective enforcement, of harassment, of abusing authority. On paper, it looked legitimate. In reality, it forced discovery, which meant records, depositions, names under oath. The sheriff welcomed it. During questioning, one councilman slipped. Just one sentence. He referenced a meeting that wasn't on the calendar. The court reporter typed anyway. That transcript mattered more than any speech ever could. Then something unexpected happened. A teacher testified, not summoned, volunteered. She spoke about textbooks removed quietly, about students warned not to ask certain questions. A mechanic followed. Then a retired clerk. Small truths stacked into something heavy. The town wasn't choosing sides loudly. It was choosing them irreversibly. That night, the sheriff drove alone past the edge of town. No escort. No lights. He stopped where the dirt road met the woods. The same place the old meetings used to happen. He didn't get out. He didn't need to, because someone was already there. A man stepped forward, hands visible. No robe, no hood, just fear. "You're not supposed to win like this," the man said. The sheriff looked at him. "I'm not trying to win," he replied. "I'm trying to finish." The man swallowed. "What do you want?" The sheriff didn't raise his voice. "I want you to understand something," he said. "You don't disappear when you're exposed. You disappear when no one's afraid to say your name." The man stepped back into the trees and didn't come out again. The following week, the state arrived. Quietly, with clipboards, then cameras, then resignations. No speeches. No apologies. Just empty chairs. The town didn't become perfect, but it became different. And that difference was permanent. On his desk, the sheriff kept one file open, unlabeled. Inside was a photograph from years ago. Him, younger, standing in a place where silence had once protected the wrong people. That was his secret past. He had learned something early. You don't defeat movements by confronting their strength. You defeat them by removing the shadows they hide in. And this town had finally turned on the lights. Argerchaho, next Maine, the lights stayed on. That was the part nobody expected. Weeks passed. No retaliation. No dramatic collapse. Just quiet adjustments, the kind that hurt systems built on silence. The new interim council held meetings with doors open. Minutes were published. Budgets explained line by line. Boring. And that boredom was lethal to the old power. The sheriff became a problem in a different way now. Not because he was feared, but because he was predictable. He followed procedure. He answered questions. He wrote everything down. That terrified people who had survived on ambiguity. Then came the backlash phase. Not in town. Online. An article appeared from a regional blog. Headline carefully vague. Outsider law enforcement experiment fails small town. They questioned his credentials, his motives, his connections. The comments section did what it always does. But the sheriff didn't respond. Instead, he released something small. A timeline. Just dates, actions, documents. No emotion. No defense. Within hours, another outlet noticed something. The blog's editor had once represented the same citizens association that filed the lawsuit. Conflict of interest. The article vanished by morning. That was the last coordinated attempt. After that, resistance fractured. People who once shared rooms stopped sharing blame. One former deputy applied for a transfer. Another quietly retired early. A third requested immunity and talked. Nothing cinematic. Just erosion. The sheriff's secret past never became public in the way people expected. No big reveal. No press conference. But some things leaked anyway. A college record showing he studied law enforcement oversight, not policing tactics. A photo placing him at a civil rights trial decades earlier, sitting in the back row, taking notes. A mentor's name surfaced, someone known for dismantling extremist networks through paperwork, not raids. People connected dots. They realized this wasn't a man reacting to power. This was a man who had studied how power survives. The town changed slowly. A mural replaced the painted cross on the water tower. No dedication ceremony. Just paint. New colors. Different hands. On election day, turnout doubled. No slogans referenced the past. They didn't need to. At sunset, the sheriff locked his office and walked home. No escort. No applause. A kid rode past on a bike and waved. The sheriff waved back. Later that night, he opened the unlabeled file one last time. Removed the photo. Placed it in a drawer. Then he closed the folder. Empty now. Finished. Because the town was no longer something to be owned. And the KKK hadn't been defeated by force. They had been defeated by something worse. Visibility, process, memory, and a sheriff who understood one simple truth. When hate loses control of the story, it loses everything. 3 months later, the sheriff received a letter. No return address. Typed. No threats. Just one line. You don't belong to this town's future. He read it once, folded it, logged it, then did something unusual. He pinned it to the public notice board inside the station, right next to the weekly arrest log. No commentary. That single act did more damage than arrests ever could, because now everyone knew someone was still watching, and they were afraid enough to write instead of act. That's when the economic pressure began. The hardware store stopped extending credit to certain families. A construction permit got delayed. A church fundraiser suddenly lost its venue. Nothing illegal. Nothing provable. Just coordinated discomfort. The sheriff noticed the pattern before anyone else. Not because he was smarter, but because he'd seen it before. In another town, another decade, different uniforms. He called a closed-door meeting. Not with politicians, with accountants, bank managers, permit officers, clerks, people who never make headlines, but decide who eats comfortably. He didn't accuse. He asked questions, very slow ones. Why did this approval take 6 weeks instead of 2? Why did the criteria change after submission? Who benefits if this stays unresolved? Silence stretched. Then someone spoke, quietly. I was told not to push it. By who? A pause. Then a name. Not a Klansman. Not a leader. A connector. The kind of man who never wears robes, but knows where they're kept. That name went into a different file. Not police, not criminal, civil liability. 2 weeks later, 3 businesses received notices. Routine audits, compliance checks. Nothing aggressive, just thorough. 1 failed, then another. The 3rd settled, and suddenly the pressure reversed. Permits cleared, credit restored, venues reopened. The town felt it, not as victory, as relief. But the most dangerous moment hadn't arrived yet. It came at a school board meeting. A man stood up during public comment, voice steady. Sheriff, people say you're digging into things that should stay buried. The room froze. The sheriff didn't respond immediately. He walked to the podium, looked at the man, then looked at the room, and said, No, I'm documenting them. That sentence spread faster than any speech, because buried things can be denied. Documented things cannot. That night, an old photograph resurfaced online. A black and white image. A younger man, standing behind a row of officers. Not protesting, not leading, observing. Someone captioned it, outsider agenda. But they'd miscalculated. Within hours, someone else added context. The courthouse, The year, the case. A successful civil action that dismantled a violent network without a single arrest. The sheriff's past wasn't secret anymore, but it wasn't scandal either. It was intent, and that scared the last remaining loyalists. Because this wasn't about power, it was about permanence. Records outlive people. By winter, the town no longer whispered. They argued openly, messy, uncomfortable. Democracy without filters. The sheriff watched from a distance. That was always the goal, to make himself unnecessary. On the final day of the year, he received another letter, this one handwritten, from a local mother. It read, "They don't own us anymore." The sheriff placed it in the drawer, next to the photo, and closed it.